Okay, welcome back to the Veridian booth, the Just the Facts segment that we do every hour. And my name is John Sheehan. I'm the head of law enforcement sales for Veridian Weapon Tech, and I have the honor to be joined by Massad Ayoob, of course, who needs no introduction. Everyone knows this gentleman, and thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today, Mas.
Oh, it's my pleasure, John.
Just quick shout out to anybody that if you have any questions for Mas during this, please just step up to the microphone. Mike's over off to the side here, and just your question gets you a free Veridian ball cap too. So don't be shy. We'd like to have you speak to us and let Mas impart some wisdom to you. So just start out by saying you've got a new book coming out. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that's kind of my Tom Sawyer whitewashing the fence book. Title is Armed Defense, What the Experts Want You to Know. I just did the introduction and 1 or 2 chapters, but for each segment I rounded up a subject matter expert who's really famous and first tier in their particular area. And we put together kind of a clean dozen instead of a dirty dozen of pretty sharp people. That'll be out mid-May from Digest Books, and it's already available for pre-order at Amazon.
And what kind of tell us what the book is about in a kind of general terms?
We've got John Hearn talking about learning theory and how the brain connects with the body in a time of crisis. We have Dr. Alexis Artwall, the leading police psychologist who studied the psychological after effects of having had to use deadly force, speaking on that topic, and speaking also on altered perceptions in time of crisis, explaining how tunnel vision works, auditory exclusion, tachypsychia, the sense of things going in slow motion because the mind is racing so much faster than we're used to processing information. It creates the illusion of it happening more slowly than it is. We have Dr. Anthony Simone, the famous neuropsychologist, who is also now a police psychologist as well, discussing the mental preparation for dealing with the deadly force situation and dealing with the aftermath of having had to use it. We have the one person in the book who we had to give a pseudonym to. He's working the robbery homicide division of a major police department that's kind of sensitive about its people talking about what they do, so he had to use a pseudonym for that. And he's talking about the many armed robbery cases he's seen that have evolved into shootings, and the average armed citizens who fought back. And what he found was basically exactly what the other researchers have found. The armed citizen fighting back is going to have a whole lot better chance than laying there helpless and putting your life in the hands of the man threatening you with deadly force. What he also found, though, was there was a few negative outcomes. And every time there was a negative outcome, it tended to be Dunning-Kruger effect. Somebody who thought, gee, I've got a gun, so now automatically I'm a gunfighter. You know, the guy Jeff Cooper warned us about, buying a violin doesn't make you a violinist. The person who was carrying with an empty chamber, for example, and when the moment came, didn't have time to chamber around and shoot the other fellow in time. In contrast to that, we have... let's see, what else have we got there? We've got Tom Givens, who's the ideal contrast to that particular chapter. Tom has more than 60 of his graduates from the Rangemaster School in Memphis, Tennessee, who've been in shootings, and every single one of them prevailed in their incident. And it's good looking at those 2 chapters to correlate the 100% outcome of survival of the trained versus the high, but still unfortunately less than 100% of the people who just bought the stuff but didn't really drill in its use and didn't really have it down when they were ready. We have Dr. William April, who's probably the leading criminal psychologist today, who studies the worst of the worst and says, look, here's the face of the enemy. Here's how these people think. And they do not think like you. And put all together, that sort of thing is what we were looking for was a wide spectrum, holistic look of what armed citizens all about, what's going on in the other guy's mind, what needs to be going on in yours, what preparation do you need? How do you recognize the danger signals? Everything from the strategic approach if the shark is going to give you a little bump to see whether or not you're going to harpoon it before it bites you, all the way up to recognition of assaultive behavior, body language, and subtle cues like that. We have a chapter by Marty Hayes on the guy who literally founded the post-self-defense support industry, on how he began Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, the whole industry that's burgeoned up over that in just those last few years since, and what the individual needs to look for. What, when you start getting what we get today, what I've come to call Ryan Jewlison effect. If the name doesn't ring a bell, let's go back to late February of 2012, the shooting of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida by George Zimmerman. We know now, anybody who cared enough about following the trial knows, that was clear-cut self-defense. And within hours, the very skilled investigating officers knew it. Within days, Norman Wolfinger, one of the most respected state's attorneys, prosecutors in the state of Florida, knew it. What Trayvon Martin's parents did not know was the depth that their son had gotten into thug life. They knew there was a problem going on there, and that's why a kid from Miami was up in Central Florida living with his dad, who was trying to basically straighten him out with tough love. They don't realize their son has violently attacked someone who had to shoot him in self-defense. All they know is our son was 17, he didn't have a gun, and he's dead. And you can imagine the outrage that they felt.
Sure.
They went to an attorney named Benjamin Crump. Ben Crump is essentially the Johnny Cochran of Florida. Made a significant part of his living suing people in the criminal justice system. And there's no such thing as a bad boy, and by extension, there's no such thing as a justifiable homicide. He reaches out to a very high-powered PR guy named Ryan Jewlison. Jewlison is the one who takes the picture of Trayvon Martin. Now, you have to remember, at time of death, minutes before the shooting, the 7-Eleven camera, which took the last pictures of Trayvon Martin in life, shows him absolutely towering over a clerk who was proven in court to stand 5 feet 10 inches tall. Trayvon's own mother at one time had described him as being 6'3". Now you can see I'm not a big guy, and George Zimmerman's a little bit shorter than me. Instead of the towering man in the dark, he takes the picture of Trayvon Martin at approximately age 12.
The cute picture, everybody's seen it.
Goes to all his New York media contacts, and the meme is born. It's this innocent, sweet little child, and throughout, Benjamin Crump could not say the teen Trayvon Martin. If you go back and you look at any of his press conferences, and the child, the poor child. And I truly believe if he could have gone back in a time machine and told 17-year-old Trayvon Martin a child, Trayvon Martin would have kicked him in the balls. But I digress. So this goes to the New York media. The narrative is created of the sweet, innocent child skipping through the rain with his box of Skittles when suddenly he is gunned down by the racist murderer. And you saw what happened after that. It was ginned up to the point where political pressure forced literally Wolfinger wound up being forced out of office, replaced on this case by a special prosecutor who obviously had an agenda. And you saw what happened. You saw the prosecution withholding evidence from the defense, totally in violation of prosecutorial ethics, for which there was not so much as a slap on the wrist. You saw the jury acquit the man, and there's never been a more transparent trial in history. Virtually every minute of that trial, except for sidebar, is archived on YouTube for anyone who cares to look. But in a world that takes its news in tweets and short sound bites, a great majority of this country still believes that George Zimmerman was a murderer. Now, getting back to the post-self-defense issues, this was an ordinary working young man, 27 years old, recently married. a defense like this is going to go six figures. And when you have to fight what they had to fight, it goes larger. The legal bills went well into seven figures. Last year I was able to bring one of the co-counsels, Don West, into the firearms law seminar for Texas Bar Association. Don said his hours alone added up to more than 3,000 hours spent on that trial, from the time of being retained to the time of acquittal. Talk to a criminal defense attorney, somewhere between $300 to $500 an hour is standard fee. You do the math, it's a little too painful
1.5 million.
for me. Yeah, the rate, and that's just for one of the two attorneys that you need. And the bottom line is, most of us don't have that kind of change laying around for emergencies. And thus the rationale of an organization that can come in and back you up. Now, what Marty did, and I think it was brilliant, it was not insurance per se. It was a holistic approach of everything from we provide training for you that you can take at home. Here is how you document that training. The crap hits the fan, you call us. We're not going to tell you, oh, any lawyer in America, we'll pay the bill later. Here's 10 grand on the table now for the attorney of your choice, and if you don't have one, we'll get you the best we can as fast as we can. And if you invoke what we call the program, the boots on the ground program, we'll get one of our people there within 24 to 48 hours to assist your counsel while everything's fresh. So when I say what we did with the book was a holistic approach, we're looking at before, during, and after, with the after element encompassing both psychological, emotional, and the very practical reality of the possibility of a criminal trial, the possibility of a civil trial. And I'm sorry, in a world where people say a good shoot is a good shoot, we're here in April, it's just a couple of weeks since Easter, and whenever I hear a good shoot is a good shoot, it's kind of like, yeah, and next Easter a bunny's going to come to your house and bring you eggs. Because it doesn't work that way, sports fans.
You know, and that's such a great point too, because and now in this day and age, we're coming into a different political climate where until the election, we were all worried about there's going to be a massive gun grab, and our guns are going to be taken away, our gun rights are going to be taken away. Well, now everyone's breathing a sigh of relief and getting a little more complacent, but we still have that specter out there of massive public opinion and media sway against the gun owner, who is justified in the use of that weapon, and the way the media can twist and manipulate the way they want to see it. And Trayvon Martin was such an excellent case of that. You bring up hit all the points there. It's absolutely true. And maybe with that, I think everybody that does carry should really start thinking about, I got no dog in this hunt, but getting some sort of an insurance. You kind of glanced on that or whatever, but you need to protect yourself these days.
Well, I don't think anybody listening to it drives an uninsured automobile. None of us are going out looking for a car crash today. None of us are going to go out on the highway and play demo derby. But we know bad things can happen to good people. I mentioned one of the fellows who contributed to the new book is John Hearn, the famous police trainer. John is the guy who said, it's not about the odds, it's about the stakes. And basically, none of us standing here carry a gun every day because we expect to be in a gunfight every day. It's because we know if that happens, the results are so absolutely unacceptably catastrophic if we are helpless against it, that we're going to take the inconvenience of dressing around the gun, we're going to take the inconvenience of not shopping in certain gun-free zones, so we can protect our families if that black swan event takes place, and if we're alone when it happens, so we can go home to the families that expect us to be there for them tomorrow morning.
Right, and as cops, we always knew that anyway. When we were, our whole job was to get home to our families at the end of the day. But it's the same thing with the legally armed citizen as well, obviously, and we have to be conscious of that too.
Well, whenever somebody says, I don't need a gun, I'm not a cop, I tell them, every single cop who ever got in that gunfight because that person had savaged at least one helpless person before the cop got there. And if that guy gets to you before the cop gets to him, why don't you think about that for a minute? And think if that's worth wearing a pound or two, taking a week or two out of your life to learn what you're doing with it, live up to the responsibility that comes with it. And if that happens, have you ever noticed bad guys look around for cops before they pounce the victims?
They sure do.
We're a nation of 320 million people, fewer than 1 million cops. Of those 1 million cops, they're working 40 hours out of every week, and every week is 168 hours long. And of the 52 of those weeks, there's going to be at least 2 weeks vacation, at least a week of in-service training, God knows how many court days, sick days, injuries out days, et cetera, et cetera. Do the math. We can't afford to put a cop on every doorstep 24/7, and I don't think we want that.
No.
God, that would be the Stasi. That would be the KGB. In essence, part of the freedom that we're here celebrating this week at the NRA annual meeting is with that freedom, with that gift of freedom comes the responsibility to take care of ourselves, to think about who we're going to elect to office. And by the way, anyone with earshot of me, thank you for your vote last time.
That's exactly.
Because how many of you can picture, seriously, right now we're sitting in that, what John very aptly called the complacency of the Trump victory. You remember, the woman that he was running against at one point said if she was elected president, she would every minute be thinking of how she could take the guns away. Her lesser vampires, her minions, were calling everyone here. NRA, the NRA is a terrorist organization. Granted, every one of you here are terrorist. Okay, my God, it was analogous to the young Adolf Hitler branding the Jews being responsible for the problems of Germany. And I'm probably not the only person listening to this that during that election felt like a Jew in Berlin helplessly watching the rise of Adolf Hitler. Before anybody invokes Godwin's law, whoever calls the other guy a Nazi first loses the argument. Ayoob's corollary to Godwin's law: if you don't want anybody to call you a goddamn Nazi, don't act like a goddamn Nazi and don't talk like a goddamn Nazi.
Perfectly said, Mas. Perfectly said. You know, you bring up such a great point, too, about being responsible as far as a gun owner. And, of course, we mean responsible by being well-trained and making the right decisions in the course of a deadly force encounter, but also, like we had already said, making sure you're taking care of yourself post-shooting, not just mentally and psychologically, but financially in case you do run into some sort of a problem, because 9 times out of 10, maybe even 9.5 times out of 10, the media, who's the other minion of the other candidate, is going to paint you as something other than an ideal person, a desirable person, that you, because of the tool or the implement that you carried, it somehow has changed you and made you a bad person. It's made you a person prone to violent tendencies, looking for a fight, and that's just not the case. And that's, you know, that's the world we live in. So, you know, post shooting, you're not just battling the family of the person that you shot, but also that media. By and large, the majority of that media is not going to be in your corner and is going to paint you something other than what you really are.
The media has been demonizing guns and gun owners for at least 2 generations now.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So you're what you bring to the table is you'll testify for the defense in cases where uses of force happen. So you come from both sides. You're also involved in law enforcement in New Hampshire. You're a captain. But then you've also found yourself in a situation where you've also testified for the defense, which is so unique. You know, kind of get into that as far as an expert testimony standpoint and testifying in some of these cases.
I've had a few attorneys sneer at me and say, so you work both sides of the street. And my answer to that is justice is a two-way street. If you only go in one direction on a two-way street, you're only going to see half of what's happening, and inevitably you're going to end up traveling in circles.
Exactly. And so when you're testifying in these cases as an expert witness, what are you usually called to testify to? Do you get the nuances of the case prior to getting up on the stand and testifying? How does that work?
I demand complete discovery, that is, every bit of evidence that the defense has or the retaining party has before I'll even take the case. I turn down more cases than I take. I'm only going to take it if the evidence convinces me this guy is on the side of the angels. And you ask, okay, you carried a badge for 43 years. If the evidence has convinced you that people like you arrested this guy, how can he be on the side of the angels? What are the cops, a bunch of jackbooted thugs who are out to get us all? No, the answer is very often it was the armed citizen who did everything right until the last piece of brass hits the sidewalk and rolls to a stop, and has never given a thought of what he's going to do after this happens. And they end up basically inadvertently doing imitations of criminals. I've come to call it false positive effect. When I say false positive, look at it in a medical environment. Let's say you were having heart attack symptoms. They rush you into the emergency room, and you are manifesting every classic symptom of heart attack. They run the test come back positive, they treat you for a heart attack. But let's say you've got something else. Let's say you have ailment B instead of the heart attack. And the treatment for heart attack turns out to be contraindicated for ailment B. And you end up dying from it. Well, was that medical malpractice? No. It was, you had basically waddled in like a duck, quacked like a duck, shown feathers and webbed feet like a duck, and were naturally presumed to be a duck. And it's simply an unfortunate confluence of circumstance. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking about here? Let's step out of the emergency room and onto the street. You're on your way home tonight from this conference, you're attacked, you have to go to the gun, and you win the fight. Well, the first cops that get there, they're going to have to do a little diagnosis too. Here's a guy laying here in a puddle of blood, and here's a guy standing over here with a smoking gun. And most of their experience, whenever they have seen those symptoms, the guy laying horizontal turned out to be the victim in the puddle of blood, and the guy with the smoking gun turned out to be the perpetrator. Now, it can get worse. How many of the people listening to this have ever had somebody tell you, if you ever get in a shooting, just look both ways for witnesses, and if you don't see any, just pick up your brass and leave, and it'll save all the hassle. Okay, and I tell them, the prisons are full of people who looked both ways for witnesses and didn't see them until they appeared to testify at trial. But it's almost as old as mankind, the principle that flight equals guilt. Yesterday at the firearms law seminar, I quoted Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee where no man pursueth, but the righteous man stands his ground as bold as a lion. And this is what the cops have come to expect. The intended victim of a crime, when they get there, the first thing that victim says is, that SOB did this, by God, I'll testify against him. But instead, like the typical perpetrator, you have fled. Do we hear the sound of that duck starting to quack a little bit louder here? Or you've stayed at the scene. And the cop gets there, and the cop says, buddy, lady, what happened? In a world where everybody who ever was the genuine victim, every storekeeper who ever grabbed a shoplifter or something like that, and said, I'll tell you what happened, this SOB, this and that. You say to him, I'm not talking to you without my lawyer. Well, every guilty SOB that cop ever arrested, what was the first thing the guy said to him? I ain't talking to you until I talk to my mouthpiece. Mm-hmm. Which, that ain't the words you're going to use. I guarantee you that's how the cop is going to hear it. And remember when you were young, Mommy told you you only get one chance to make a first impression. That's true in the criminal justice system, too. The first responding officer, who will very quickly be followed by the lead investigator, their reports are going to have tremendous influence on the given prosecutor, who works hand in glove with those people every day. They're the ones who, as you well know as a retired big city cop, feed the suspects into the machine. And now, basically, when that happens, don't come sniveling to me. Right. And say, oh my God, I merely defended myself, and evil black jackbooted status thugs arrested me and treated me like a murderer. Dude, the corollary to Godwin's law, you act like a criminal, you talk like a criminal, you behave like a criminal, you're going to be treated like a criminal. So what we've suggested, what I've been suggesting for decades, and a lot of other organizations, thank God, have picked up on it, is basically a 5-point checklist. Now, the questions may come from the first responding officer, who does certainly have a responsibility to gather intelligence, and most definitely are going to come from the assigned lead investigator. But I recommend the 5-point checklist be: first, explain the active dynamic. And after you've been in a self-defense shooting, the active dynamic is not, I shot this dirtbag. The active dynamic is what made you shoot said dirtbag. This man attacked me. This man grabbed my child and was trying to drag my child into the back of a blacked out van, whatever it was. Establish from the beginning, this thing waiting for the chalk fairy to come draw the old line around on the sidewalk. Okay, this thing is the perpetrator. I was the intended victim. Indicate that you will sign the complaint. Okay, more confirmation. Victim is the one standing up. Perpetrator is one laying there waiting for the chalk outline. Okay, point out evidence. You don't know how quickly things like spent shell casings, for example, will disappear. They get picked up as souvenirs from crime scenes by passers-by.
They get picked up in tire treads, boot treads.
Yep. Across the emergency services, paramedics, firefighters, cops wear the heavily treaded combat-style boots so they can handle, everything from oily.
Can't tell you how many times I showed up at a shooting scene and my own guys might have had in the lugs of their boots, or we had to pry them out of the ambulance tires.
Yep, absolutely. Or how many times just walking across the range, not with your sneakers, but if you had like your hunting boots on, you find, holy crap, I got home with a 9mm round in the tread. Same thing. And that's why some of the cops good-heartedly refer to the emergency medical services, the evidence eradication team, because preserving life is the first priority. They've got to rush in there with the gurneys. They're, or preserving the evidence is secondary. The sooner you point it out, the sooner it's going to be recovered to support the truth of what you're saying. Fourth, point out the witnesses. Point out witnesses. You saw this classically in the Ferguson shooting 3 years ago. Everyone comes out of the woodwork for their meme. When the deceased young man's family hires an attorney who consults with Benjamin Crump, who consults with Ryan Jewelison. Anybody starting to see a pattern here? And the New York media says evil, brutal police drag young scholar into car and pummel him and then gun him down, hands up, don't shoot. And the final evidence showed, no, you had a much larger man who moments before had violently assaulted a much smaller innocent citizen, now goes up to the police car and smashes the cop in the head while the cop is restrained by his seatbelt, which is the equivalent of you have an accomplice who's pinning your arms behind you. Think about it. Tries to grab the officer's gun, sustains a muzzle contact gunshot wound of the forearm, runs. The officer chases him. The guy turns, lunges at him again to take the gun, and the officer shot him. And that was what turned out to be the truth. But you've still got, what happened with the meme there. But the key thing there, notice that officer was not indicted. And the reason was skillful questioning in front of the grand jury of the alleged witnesses showed how many of those people were never there. They never saw it, but they wanted their 15 minutes of fame, so they picked up the meme, pretended they saw this, pretended they saw that. If the witnesses are pointed out right there, right then, and identified to the officers, it's much less likely that someone later is going to surface because the cops are going to say, really, we were there, where were you, bud? The other thing you've got is so many people are afraid of being involved in the criminal justice system that the witnesses whose testimony could save you might be thinking in these critical formative minutes, do I really want to get involved? Do I really want to have to come back to Atlanta, let's say, to testify in a trial 3 months from now? Maybe I'll just quietly walk away. And when they do, the testimony that would have proven you did the right thing walks away with them. So that's why it's important to point out the witnesses. Finally, it would be at that point that I would cease responding to further questions. The further questions will go into details. You'll be getting questions like, how many shots did you fire? And in an adult lifetime of debriefing gunfight survivors, I can still count on these fingers the number who were able to count their shots once it went past 3 or 4. They'll ask you exactly how far away was he in feet and inches. And none of us can know that. One of the things that Dr. Artwell presents in that book we were discussing, the tunnel vision effect. One of the things that tunnel vision does is it creates literally the optical illusion that the opponent is larger than he actually is, his weapon is larger than it is, and that he is physically closer than he is. Brief digress, people who haven't experienced it ask, how could that be? Briefly, if you're here with us in the studio audience, if you look up here, you see two guys on a podium, you see the podium, you see the microphones, you see the displays. One of us pulls a gun. You're going to see one big guy, one big gun, and it's not anything that's happening in the eyes, it's happening in the brain. It's called cortical perception. The cortex of the brain at that moment, as it goes into survival mode, is screening out anything that's not imperative to immediate, right here, right now survival. And I've seen, it's not mathematically certain, but I've seen almost a 3-to-1 confusion on that. If the guy tells me he was 3 feet away, it's probably going to turn out the guy was 3 yards away. And the reason is we spend our whole life determining distance by how big is the thing we're describing vis-a-vis its background. When that background falls away from cortical perception, it's like you've been looking at life through a wide-angle lens your whole life, and somebody just put on a 600-millimeter zoom. You aren't going to get the definition right. But you've said 3 feet, and it turns out to be 3 yards. You said, I fired 3 shots, but it turns out there was only 1 round left in your pistol. The people who judge you later who've never been in that condition read natural terror that you were facing, all they see is a liar. And that's why it's never wise to be answering detailed questions of how close was he, exactly what words did he say, and exactly what sequence. One of our leading experts on this, the clinical psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, said classically, we all like to believe our memory is a tape recorder. She said, it's not. It's more like Wikipedia. Somebody else might have got in there and edited it without you noticing. You might have gotten in there and edited it subconsciously, and she doesn't add, and it might just be full of crap anyway. So basically, that's why our 5-point checklist would be, point out the active dynamic. Explain that this man was the attacker. Second, indicate that you will sign the complaint against this person. Third, point out any evidence that you're aware of. Fourth, point out any witnesses you're aware of. And fifth, at that point, I would be saying, Detective, you'll have my full cooperation after I've spoken with counsel. And we found that seems to be the best way to avoid that false positive mistaken identity effect.
And that's everything that Mas has just brought up is critical, and we also, both of us understand as law enforcement, former law enforcement in my case, is that you've just been involved in a traumatic incident, and you've just had to shoot somebody. And what we're trying to tell you is that the gunfight's not over. The fight for your life isn't over when that person is down and the police get there. You need to try, just dig in and compose yourself and get those facts out to that officer, those responding officers, as best you can, and not lock up. And just realize, okay, I'm not done here. I still have to explain what happened. And it's so critical as far as that goes. You just have to be able to do it. And again, I've been there. I've been in shootings, and it's difficult. Your heart's racing, and yeah, you don't perceive things as they really happened. As far as shots being fired and things like that, it's absolutely true. It's very critical. Well, everything that you've said today has just been a wealth of information, and the book that you're coming out with, Straight Talk on Armed Defense, is coming out when?
That should be, they're taking pre-orders now at Amazon, and it should be out mid-May.
I would highly suggest all of you really seriously consider getting that. That should be the Bible for the armed citizen as far as being able to protect yourself post-shooting. and realize the processes that you'll be going through should you have to take such a critical action. Moss, it's been great talking to you today, and thank you so much for your time, sir.
Been my pleasure, brother.
All right, thank you very much. Big round of applause for Moss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go, does anybody have any questions for him? Can you step up to the mic and go ahead and...
Hey, Moss, there's when you call 911, that call is recorded.
It sure is.
So you have to tell them something. You can't
Yeah,
just call.
I would say,
and
I've been attacked. Suspect is down. Give them give the location before you give anything else in case you're cut off. At that point, describe yourself. Give them a physical description. I'm the intended victim complainant. I'm wearing a green gator T-shirt and a ball cap and greenish brown shorts, and I'll be standing on the corner. My pistol is holstered. They're going to be very concerned about the gun. They'll tell you unload it or set it down somewhere. I would simply holster it and tell them the weapon is secured, because the situation is not. This may not be over, and you may need that gun again before the cops get there.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Step up to the mic, please.
Thanks for your years of providing information to the public. We've been following you. Question with respect to less than lethal force.
Right.
Say there's a confrontation, one or two people, threats that are showing aggressive behavior. You know, they don't have any weapons visible, but they do have their fists and whatever. You can obviously address less than lethal force situations with less than lethal force. Would drawing a firearm be considered use of, you're not shooting it, less than lethal force, or would that be considered an escalation and assault with a deadly weapon? Because
Yeah. A lot of that is going to be open to the interpretation of the eyes of the public and the case law of the given state.
Yep.
Massachusetts, I would expect them to see any drawing of a gun as some level of deadly force. You get out in Wyoming and the situation you described, the local sheriff is probably going to say, well, shit, son, next time don't just put your hand on the gun and warn them, y'all might want to get it out there quicker. So a lot of it's going to go with the flow of the culture of the community. We always talk about the mood of the court. It's really the mood of the court that you have to be considered about. It's actually the mood of the local prosecutor. Now, if you've got two guys who are physically threatening you, multiple opponents, even though they're unarmed, are one of the many categories of disparity of force. Disparity of force means the other party or parties may not be armed with a per se weapon. But if they violently attack you, the likelihood of that attack causing death or great bodily harm is so huge that their ability to cause that damage becomes their equivalent of a deadly weapon. Seeing here in our live audience, I'm looking right now at two guys who are probably either one of them, two of me. Okay, guys built like them, or one reason guys built like me carry guns to begin with. Okay, now the two smallest people in here, if it was a 2-on-1 unarmed attack, you can only fight on one front at once. Okay, you got to be Bruce Lee and have the great scriptwriter on your side and the great director in the sky on your corner to beat 2-on-1 of just your own size. Was there, as you look around in the audience, was there a physical handicap or a physical disability? The able-bodied attacking the disabled is another element of disparity of force. Even if that disability has taken place in the course of the instant assault. For example, his kick broke your knee, something like that. There could also be, we cited the Zimmerman case earlier, position of disadvantage. Maybe you and he are the same size, the same age, the same strength. But he's got you up against a wall, you can't break his hold, and he's banging your head against that brick wall. And with every blow, you realize, I can't take this any longer, or I'm going to die. At that point, the disparity of force is kicked in, and deadly force would be authorized. It's generally a real good idea to be looking to avoidance more than when you start seeing the aggression at its lower level. Okay, the guy looks at my girlfriend and said, "What are you doing with a bozo like him?" I'm going to say, yes, sir. I'm sure she asked herself that question often too, but we're leaving now. I'm sorry if I've offended you. If this escalates, I don't care if they see me as a coward. I've got about 50 witnesses who are going to say, I did something personally humiliating to myself. I worked so hard to avoid this. And when they press it and things take their natural course, I'm not going to be the guy who was spoiling for a fight. I'm not going to be the guy who kept the ball rolling. I'm going to be the innocent victim who cringed back against the savage oncoming assault until there was no other choice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you all see some small, subtle difference in all that?
Sir?
Yeah, supposing you're involved, of course, in a shooting, someone's killed. I know you've said somewhere along the way they're going to ask, why did you take their life? And your response is, they forfeited their life. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I've always hated that turn of phrase. You know, we all grow up saying, you know, take a life. If I shot him to death, if I take your pen, I have your pen. Okay, if you take his life, do you have his life? Would you want his miserable, rotten life? He forced you to end his life. Okay, they're going to try to paint you as the local vigilante, the local gunman, the NRA gun nut. What do the anti-gunners call us? The ammo-sexual who acted out with his sick phallic symbol. How many are sick of hearing that? Guys, the next time you hear it, look them in the face and say, you know what? If guns were phallic symbols, none of us ever would have bought one with a 2-inch barrel. But I want you to be able to say, sir, you want to know what I felt like? I felt like a rape victim. This man forced me to commit what I consider to be an unnatural act, the ending of another human being's life, or die. I'm sickened and disgusted by what he forced me to do. It beat being dead, it beat being stomped into a vegetable. Think that might be a little better way to phrase it? John?
Excellent. Sir?
What about pistols with light triggers, trick triggers? I've read some things that you read.
The other, you saw Marty Hayes here earlier, and I mentioned him. He wrote a chapter in that book, and he's the guy who really founded the post-self-defense support industry. Marty's also been an expert witness in shooting cases for 27 years now. 2 years ago, when he and I were teaching at the Legal Eagles Conference in the Pacific Northwest, Marty made a classic statement that I've never forgotten. He said, every one of these trials, the other side made the gun a witness. Remember we said earlier the media has been, and certain politicians have been demonizing guns and gun owners for all these decades. They've demonized them to the jury pool. An opposing counsel knows that and plays to that. Now, insofar as, you know, custom grips on the gun,
Punisher skulls.
Oh, Punisher skulls on the back plate of
Oh,
your
God.
Glock.
I got a quick story on that. Is I had a cop working for me when I was a sergeant in Las Vegas Metro Police, and he put a Punisher skull on the back of his Glock. And I just about went ballistic. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because do you know what's going to happen if you get into shooting and they take pictures of that gun and what they're going to think of you, the perception of you, and how that's going to be? Regardless, I mean, I love the Punisher. I love Marvel and all that stuff, right? But there's a time and a place for everything.
The three things I'd avoid, you've got Viridian light, for example, on your gun, no problem. We'll be able to show why. Virtually any well-thought-out modification of the gun. When the other side says, ooh, evil, obsessed with weapons, more efficient killer, blah, 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 and they do say that, we can shoot that down with a simple soundbite. Anything that makes it easier for the good guy to hit what they're shooting at under adverse conditions. It'll include extreme stress, sweat, blood on the hands, darkness, whatever. If it makes it easier to hit what they're shooting at, it concomitantly reduces the danger of a wild shot that could strike a bystander. This guy paid out of his own pocket to make that thing safer for everyone around him than it was when it left the factory. There are three things we can't do that with. Okay, the stupid crap like, you know, zombie skulls or Punisher skulls on the gun. Okay, the other side has great latitude to point to what's called continuing patterns of behavior that support their allegation that you're trying to be Rambo. The next thing up that I'd worry about, do not deactivate the safety device on a firearm. Pinning down the grip safety on a 1911. Taking the magazine disconnector safety out of a Browning high power. You're not going to get a jury of 12 gun buffs who know what you know. Okay, you're going to get a jury of 12 people expressly selected by the other side for their lack of knowledge of all of this. And you've just given a nuclear-grade soundbite to the other side. They could say in their opening statement, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for you to give me the manslaughter conviction I want, or for you to get in a lawsuit, for you to give me my client the $1 million judgment I'm asking for, all I have to do is show you that that defendant was reckless and negligent. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll prove to you he deactivates the safety devices on lethal weapons. How on earth do you explain that to 12 lay people? The big one, the one I have seen more than all the other gun-related issues combined, is the so-called hair trigger. And people don't understand where it comes from. Okay, they're thinking, you know, wait a minute, if I shot the guy deliberately, what could that have to do with anything? That's the point. The other side knows, criminal or civil, that your deliberate, objective, reasonable use of deadly force is so solid it is called a perfect defense at law once you've established it. They know that. And they don't like to climb the steep hills. They want the easy hills. They don't want to climb to the top of the tree for the richest fruit. They want the low-hanging fruit. If they just reduce the charge for murder, where malice is the key element they have to show, to manslaughter, where the key element they have to show is recklessness, and change their theory of the case to, oh, your shaky hand shot him by accident, and any responsible person would have known that a home defense gun might be pointed at a burglar with a shaky hand under stress, and this reckless, negligent person did so, and we maintain they did so by accident. Now, bam, they're into the deep pockets of the insurance company, which the insurance company doesn't pay off on any deliberate action you did. That's what's called it's called a willful tort. Okay, if the other side's theory is, oh, I'm going to get $1 million from my client by saying that you maliciously shot my guy, no, the lawyer for the insurance company is going to stand up in court and say, Your Honor, motion to dismiss. Says right here, we don't cover deliberate acts that deliberately harm other people. We don't cover willful torts. But if their theory of the case is changed to it was reckless and negligent, the lightened trigger fits in exactly and convinces the jury it's that reckless pattern of behavior. The murder charge, very tough on anybody here. Okay, none of you fit the profile of the typical murder defendant, the typical drug punk or gang punk. They know the jury's going to relate to you very soon, and if the jury relates to you, they're going to be disinclined to convict. And if they charge so high, they're going to convince the jury somebody just like them turned into a malicious murderer. That's the same as convincing each of those jurors they could have turned into a malicious murderer, and that's a tough sell. But all they got to do to win a manslaughter conviction is to convince the jury that somebody just like them for 1 second made a careless mistake, like, oh, the finger goes when it shouldn't to the hair trigger, and somebody died. That's all they need. Is that an easier sell? You guys here in the live audience, guys and gals, raise your hand if ever in your life you ever for 1 second got careless and did something incredibly stupid. Keep them up. Look around. That's what an easy sell it makes. That's what makes that false allegation so attractive to plaintiff's counsel who has a false case, to the prosecutor who has an unmeritorious case that they're driving for political gain, which as rarely as it happens, history shows us in recent years it does happen. If you've simply got a gun that the state crime lab is going to say the trigger pull weight spec is absolutely within the manufacturer's specification for duty use, the blood is out of the water. You haven't allowed them to make that argument at all. And frankly, if you can't hit what you're shooting at with a 5.5 pound stock trigger on your Glock, and you need a 3.5 pound like an orthopedic crutch, you ain't ready to be carrying it in public anyway.
All right, well, with that, we're coming up on the end of the hour. Mas, thanks again for coming. Everybody, big hand for Mas again. The book's titled Straight Talk on Armed Defense, be coming out on Amazon. Be looking for that, and please pick it up. It's going to be well worth your while. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you, John.
All right.